Welcome to the webinar. This is one of our series in the series After School Special. Our presenter today is Heath Patchell, and he'll go ahead and introduce himself a little bit further. But his presentation today is Transition Essentials, Successful Transition Planning. Thank you again for joining us, and we are being recorded. Heath, I'm going to go ahead and give you the screen.
All right. Okay. Like Maggie said, I'm Heath Patchell. I'd like to thank Brandy Jensen and Maggie Ferguson for this opportunity. Okay. Yes, this is brought to you by the Iowa Department of Public Health and the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa, and I'm glad to be here. The reason that we're here today are these things, and I'm just going to give you just a minute to read over these and let these wash over you for a minute. I think this pretty much wraps up what the purpose of the presentation is going to be, and I would challenge us to think preventatively as far as what we can do. I know that this is through that some of you may be tuned in more for the brain injury sort of information. That's not the purpose of this webinar today, but it can be incorporated into that line of thinking to serve a vast variety of different people. These purpose statements are intended to give you a way to think about how the student, how the teacher, how the parent, how case managers, service providers, parent advocates, administrators can all work together. That's me, and I can't hear you, but I hope you're laughing. I can be goofy, and there's one of my pictures that I drew for a lesson plan in one of my classes. I think that was last year, about how the team works, and that is a little foreshadowing of what we're going to talk about today. That's me in the front. I like to have a pretty good attitude and a sense of humor about myself and my learning, and those are some of my students. They have given me permission to share their likeness on this webinar. Who am I is the question that I want to start with to introduce myself. I am Heath Allen Patchell, but I am more than a name. And I want my kids to think about themselves as more of a name. I don't want them just to think. I want them to think about their thinking, especially about who they are and where they want to go. But a little bit about me. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a special education teacher. I worked as a level 3 severe and profound teacher for a decade or so before taking this job. I work in Ankeny. Now I'm the work experience coordinator in Johnston. I'm a musician, I'm a writer, I'm an arranger and public speaker. Was born in Nashua, Iowa, and I graduated from the University of Northern Iowa and took master's classes at Drake and a few other places. As an advocate for people with disabilities, I work with various local and state agencies to provide transition consultation and problem-solving strategies. I'm a pretty good communicator. I am also very involved in music, writing, and performance. I value freedom, I value diversity, I value structure, I value good work, I value friendships. I attempt to engage in life based on knowing what I believe and value. And that word value is something that's become very important to me in my teaching. And so let's get on with it. How do I define myself? Well, by what I believe, by what is important to me, by what I do, by what I'm good at, by what feedback I get from others. I gain purpose by thinking about these ideas, like I think all of us do. I strive to achieve, believing that my attempts will be successful if I apply action to my values. And if you would all just read that, maybe aloud in your own mind to yourselves, that's kind of the place to jumpstart today's discussion. So in talking about that, I want to tell you a little story to start off. I'm an avid NPR listener, and I listened to an article on NPR last week, and it was about how most people define themselves almost entirely by the feedback that they get from their social experiences. And even though social experiences do, to some extent, help me define who I am personally, I strive to become more metacognitive as I travel on through this life and through my teaching. And I guess that would be to say I strive to think about my thinking with purpose. The difference between me and the squirrels, I tell my kids, is that the squirrels think, but I think about my thinking. And as I think about my own thinking, I grow to aspire to values that are more intrinsically motivating. And I'm motivated from within. I don't need to be told what to do or how to do it, or I don't need to be penalized for doing wrong things. I want to do the right things for myself based on knowing my values. So ultimately, the decision to strive for independent problem solving is purposeful, and that gives my life value from my perspective. That kind of motivation, it makes me, work with like-minded individuals with similar values, such as the Iowa Department of Public Health and the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa. I've become more purposefully and thoughtfully realized. And I just think that's a really important conversation to have, especially when I'm introducing you to who I am, because ultimately I am going to be who I think I am, and I am also going to be how you interpret me. And I care about both things. And more importantly, I want my kids to walk away from their experiences with me feeling the same way or feeling similar. I want them to know what they value, and I want them to know what they believe. I want them to know what is important to them. I want them to define themselves by what they do to achieve that value and to work towards those beliefs and to strive to do important things that match them because they're good at them. And I want them to be able to get good feedback from me and other people for striving for that purpose. Teaching values is, and basically that's where we're going, you can probably tell. It's, in my mind, in my teaching, it's first. And I believe it should be first in all of our teaching. Some people might say, well, I'm an academic teacher, that's not my purpose. And so the discussion that we're going to go through today is going to talk about that quandary that we find ourselves in as educators, and how I believe that placing more values in purposeful lesson planning will help us understand the value in transition planning. Teach values first, then students can work towards objectives that work within their values. Following directions can be taught as a value. If students value following directions internally, they are going to be able to reflect upon feedback with dignity. That's a pretty broad statement, but I hope I can show you what I mean with that. I value doing what I can do. I value friendship. I value working hard. I value following directions. I value math. But why should students value these things? Is it the job of the parent and the teacher, or the parent or the teacher, or the teacher or the parent to teach values? That's a question. If purpose is not established early, it is much more difficult for students to be self-motivated to learn skills later. I was just sitting in my office today with a young man who's 17, and his dad asked him if he liked to work. And he laughed and he said no. And so I asked him a different question. I asked him what he loved. And he said, well, I love my mom and I love my dad, and they were so happy to hear that. It was beautiful. And then he said, I like having time to myself. I said, oh, so someday do you want to live on your own? And he said, yeah, maybe. I'd like to have my own apartment someday. And the parents were just floored because that conversation hadn't happened before. And I said, so you value that? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you have a girlfriend? And he blushed, and he said, yeah, I do. I said, do you want to take her out to a movie every once in a while? And he said, yeah, I'd really like to do that. And I said, well, what do you need to be able to do that? And he said, a ticket. And I said, well, how do you get a ticket? And he said, well, you have to have money. I said, well, how do you get money? And he said, you have to take it out of your wallet. And so we were digging a little bit deeper, and I asked him eventually, when he said he needed to get a job so that he could make money, then there is a value in working. It comes from his perspective. I didn't tell him that he was wrong for not having values. I asked him questions. I was talking with the art teacher today in school just to get a couple quotes to use for today. And our art teacher here, Dan, is just amazing with the kids. And he's tough, but the kids really respect him. And when we were talking about values, he said, well, what I try to do is when kids ask me questions, I don't tell them what to do. I just ask them questions back. And I think that's so important. When we're teaching students values, what we're really doing is we're allowing them to realize that they can teach themselves. We might be providing the framework, but we're not doing things for kids. The reason that I put this rocket ship going around in a circle that looks a little out of control may become a little bit clearer lately, but it looks a little bit out of control. It might be on fire, and sometimes I think teaching is like that. We're really excited, and we feel like we're the rocket ship, and we're going, maybe we're going around in circles, but there's action, the kids are paying attention, and you can see that's kind of like a bullseye, and that rocket is right in the middle. Maybe we as teachers think or want to think that we're in the center at the bullseye of teaching. I think there are two perspectives of all people, and I think we all function in here somewhere between these two perspectives. There are people that make good things happen, and they do those things and more other things, or not. And the mindset is, I make good things happen in my life, or things happen to me. And we're all professionals here, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. You know these things, and that's why you're successful. If you didn't make good things happen, then you wouldn't probably be in the professional spaces that you occupy at this time. But my purpose in sharing this is to think about how these ideas, how these thoughts, how these values may or may not be present in the thinking of students, especially students with disabilities, especially with students maybe that have been helped when they didn't need to be helped sometimes. Maybe when students, well, I think you get the idea. We want our students to be thinking more in this arena than this arena. And we can't tell kids, what I've learned in my teaching is I can't tell kids what not to do. I can't change kids' behavior. I can only offer them choices that they prefer over the behaviors that they're showing. If a student has a negative behavior, I'm not going to be able to get that kid to change the behavior unless I give him something to think about so that he will change his own behavior. I liken it to this family that I saw in Walmart when I was a very, very young father. My child was screaming in the cart at Walmart, and I could not get the kid to be quiet. Dylan is 14 now, and I wish I could get him to be louder and actually talk a little bit more. But back then, he saw the candy at Walmart and he started to scream because he wanted it. I was very fortunate to be able to be around some really good people that told me to not give in to that, where I looked over and I saw another young set of parents that were trying to get the kid to shut it down and gave up and gave the kid the candy bar. And I want kids to be part of that discussion to whatever ability they're able to have that. And now I want you to kind of look ahead in a child's life. I mean, all kids at a certain age are going to cry when they can't have what they want, but we learn, and our students learn, to be able to control their behaviors because they value other things more than they value negative behaviors. And I want to fast forward now to an IEP meeting that a student that is, let's say, a junior in high school is having. He's sitting at the IEP meeting, the team, most of the team's there, but he doesn't know who they are. He doesn't know what his goals are. He doesn't know what his strengths and interests and preferences are, or maybe he does, but he's not given the dignity of being asked. I would say he's functioning here, right? And talking about teaching, I want to teach more than anything, more than skills, more than the Common Core, although those things are all very important to me. I want to teach the student that he has a choice to think about his thinking and decide whether he's operating here or here. And I also want to talk to the team about that same thing. This obviously is something that makes sense when anybody I've ever talked to anybody about these things. Everybody seems to agree. But what it actually looks like in the classroom and what it looks like in teams is very different. So another thing to think about in these relationships is who's in charge, who has control, locus of control. I've always liked studying locus of control. I'm kind of a psychology nut anyway, but I want my students to be here. I want them to think, I'm internally motivated, I control my destiny. We talk about things like, I am the hero in my movie, and I am going to write the part for myself to become the hero of my life. I don't want people to be saying, you know, wow, I should have done this. This happened to me because others controlled and they made bad decisions for me. Associates, bless their heart, we have great associates here like everybody does up in Johnston, but we're trying to teach our associates to back up and let students do what they can to promote independence, because after all, that is our job, is to have our kids not need us. And that might be a discussion with mom and dad too. It might be a discussion with service providers. Knowing these things challenges me constantly to be able to have respectful and insightful, data-driven conversations with people to help them understand. And they appreciate it when a student comes to a work experience provider in the adult world, and that student can say, I control my destiny. I am driven. I value work because I want to be able to live in an apartment by myself. That simple conversation goes a long way, and these folks will really appreciate that conversation. So in general, it's all about providing a structured environment that allows students to take ownership of their learning. I'm going to move on. So locus of control. I think there's a few different ways that you can define locus of control, but I always think of it like a dartboard. And in the center is the bullseye, and this is where the control is. If the student is operating here, they are making most of the decisions of their life, and they are self-informed, and they, to the extent which they can, are making choices about how to have other people on their team help them when they need it. Let's say, for instance, mom and dad might be right in here. That's healthy in most people's locus. I'm here, and then I have my family here, and then I might have uncle, extended family here, or friends, or, that conversation with kids to make the cognitive decision to write this down. This is where I choose to be. This is a value. This makes a value statement that kids appreciate. I do not want my friends to be making my decisions for me. Even if I care about them, and even if they care about me, I value my own freedom more than I value being told what to do. And kids, especially in high school, are you kidding me? That's what they want. They want freedom. They want independence. So this is an easy sell to kids. And I found a lot of success in getting kids to motivate themselves and talking about this, even with kids that don't have the cognitive ability to do, to do even close to grade level academics. This is a conversation that kids of a lot of IQ levels can participate in because they're motivated. And then when we see that, then we can see potential, and that's pretty neat. It is important for students to understand to the best that they can that they are a part of their own conversation. This includes learning objectives and comparing those learning objectives to values, goal planning, organization, IEP teaming, and life in general. Quality teachers do this, but do teachers teach students to do this for themselves? Teachers know about this, but the next step is to get teachers to challenge students to think about their thinking. Self-help, fixing others, big fan. So it's a psychological term. It's a great team building tool too, because if you're talking about making a purposeful statement to a team that I would like to see my son lead this team and do everything that he can to tell the team who he is, and to tell the team why he believes that his math goal is important for him, because he has this dream and it has a value that is leading him towards meeting that dream. It's a little surprising that more people haven't come across these ideas, and you don't utilize these ideas as much because it's so motivating for kids. Kids get excited about a math goal when they know that if they do well in math, that they might be able to get into the culinary program at DMAC, or whatever it is that they might want to get into. People closest to the center of the locus have the most influence upon you. Obviously, we should teach all students these concepts early, and we can teach them by example. Even if a kid doesn't understand locus of control, he can understand when he's being talked with instead of talked about at an IEP meeting. And this is critical early to get students to believe that they have a place at their own IEP table. They have a purpose of trying to understand, to the best of whatever abilities they have, that they are there to participate. Oops, excuse me. So how does it start? Usually in the academic setting, it starts with problem solving. Who owns the problem? What is the problem? I think ownership is very important, because having a problem doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It can be a good thing to be able to solve your own problems. In the same way, people oftentimes are afraid to address weaknesses. In the IEP, you're supposed to list your strengths, your interests, and your preferences, and those are all wonderful things. But to me, understanding what my weaknesses are is a strength. And that's when you have that frame of mind, and when kids are challenged to accept those things in exciting ways that engage them, then problem solving becomes something that has value. It's something that can be fun. It's something that has purpose. So who owns the problem? What is the problem? Sometimes that's how it's put. What are possible solutions? Which one makes sense? And then do it, and then review it. There are a ton of different problem-solving methods out there, but I think this is one that is fairly simple, and a lot of kids can learn how to do that. Even kids that don't quite have the cognitive functioning to be able to read that can learn how to use that process, especially if you model it. As a teacher, I love it when my kids laugh at me. I love it when my kids see me fail, because then that's an opportunity for me to model problem solving to them. I can relax. I can be comfortable with my strengths and weaknesses. They laugh because I was never really a strong math guy. I get the numbers mixed up, a little bit numeric dyslexia, and my kids laugh, and I can laugh at myself. I didn't used to be able to. It used to be an embarrassing thing. But I'm proud of who I am, and I found a job that matches me to where I don't have to be a math wizard to do the job that I do, and that's a good problem-solving example. Well, maybe not the best. I could do better than that probably if you gave me a minute. But if you would take a few minutes to think about what it could look like in a learning environment, that is talking about values, showing values, and then using a problem-solving method to engage students, maybe in a different way in a classroom. So just a couple minutes. I hope this isn't like radio where silence is the radio DJ's worst nightmare. We are recording this, so I'm going to move on. But there are some best practice examples, and at the end we'll have some time for some questions and some dialogue. So if there are some things that you want to share, I would love to learn and get some ideas from you all as well. Best practice examples. Productive group work is a really neat thing, and our district right now is learning about Doug Fisher and his experimentation with productive group work. And I've just seen amazing things with my students with disabilities in productive group work situations. I do structured group pairing. In other words, I give students the opportunity to talk about what they're good at and view themselves in pairs or in small groups. So when they look at a task, for instance, we built a table not too long ago. I never knew it, but there's a lot of math, there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of organizational thinking in building a table. And I had never done it before. The students had never done it before, but that's something that they decided that they wanted to do. And they each talked about what their strengths and their weaknesses were, their interests and their preferences. And we put groups together pairing based on what they could do. That's real 21st century skills. And it was just so neat. I learned so much as well as they did. It was an open-ended activity. And I think that's important. There, with the world of the Common Core, which is a good thing, we need to still find some time for some open-ended activities where students can decide how they best learn so they can identify their strengths, their interests, their preferences, and their weaknesses so that they can ask for help after they have tried to use the problem solving on their own. I highly recommend Doug Fisher. All of this is essentially best practice is what it is. I have just given my finals before the break, before the tundra plunge happened to us, and I wanted to give you an example of how I'm trying to get students to internally to recognize that the IEP process and their education here at Johnston is more than just learning tasks. One of these questions is, this is when you are learning at the same rate as typical peers. Is that appropriate behavior? Is that grade level? Or is that fluency? So you can see my vocabulary is very much, you can get a lot just out of that one question, that I'm teaching kids reading and language activities that go back to give them the skills to lead their IEP. I just think that's so critical, and the kids enjoy it because then when they go, they're sharing with their parents, they're sharing with their case workers, they're sharing with their staff from their group homes, they're sharing with their teachers sometimes about who they are and how they're invested in their dreams and how they would like to know that their goals are based on what their dreams are so that they can believe that what they're doing is going to get them what they want to get, which is critical. Here's some more. Pre-IEP information gathering for the living, learning, and working sections in the IEP. There's a lot of different things that you can put in there, but there are living, learning, and working inventories on the Iowa Transition Matrix that you can use to gather that information before the IEP and send it out to people so they can look at it. And students can know what some of those things are, again, to the best of their ability so that they can participate in that. That's showing them that they have a reason to be there. That's basically team member development. These ideas that we're talking about, a team doesn't naturally do this. People get into education like I did because I wanted to help. I wanted to do. I wanted to be the agent of change. What I ultimately have found in education that it's about me providing the structure, but it isn't about me doing. It's about me giving students opportunities to do for themselves. And it takes team member development to do that. And it takes an ongoing team dialogue. I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't take a little bit more work up front to be able to develop a team that can think like that. But when you do, oh, I'm sorry about that, excuse me. But when you do, you're going to have a lot more balanced IEP teaming. You're going to have parents that aren't as upset. They're going to feel like they're a part of the team. We do living, learning, and working inventories. We ask the students to fill those out. Then we ask the students to take them home, read them with the parents, and the parents fill them out in a different color. Then we bring them back, and the teachers fill them out in yet a different color, and we get an idea of where the students' skills are in living, learning, and working, and then we take that information, and that can be placed on the B page in the IEP, which really brings parents into an understanding of, here's where my student is doing well, and here are some of the discrepancies that we can all work on together to get my son or daughter to be motivated to value making progress in those areas. And linking with support agency like Voc Rehab, Compass, Case Management, Ask Resource is a wonderful place where parents can get help with advocacy. The Transition Advisory Council of Polk County, different parent support groups, and so on. Now the IEP specifically, it's called the Individualized Education Plan for a reason. It's not called the Education Plan. It's not called the Teacher Education Plan, although I have to admit that sometimes I would like it to be called that because sometimes I think I know best, and maybe I do sometimes, but that's really not the point, and I've had to learn to temper my attitude with that and try to remember that it is the individual that I am trying to help cultivate themselves. So the these are there's more to an IEP than just 10 parts, but generally these 10 parts are what I want to help my students understand. The personal information. Who is the student? Most of the time when I go to IEP meetings and I'm on the team, somebody else reads that. The student can read all of that. Team information, the student can make the introductions, because if the student doesn't know who the people are at the table, how are they really going to help that student? And right there, with just that simple gesture, that student is understanding that this is for them, by them, and ultimately it's going to be because of them that they're going to be able to meet whatever goals come later. Current functioning, who am I? If I don't know who I am, at least to some level, or believe that I am good, not broken, I am able, not disabled, and all of those conversations that teachers have with kids to build their confidence. If I don't know who I am, then I'm going to have a really hard time, for instance, getting a job after high school, because I have to understand who I am before I'm going to be able to function on a team. Then there's comparisons to peers. The Iowa core scores. Does the student know how they did on the Iowa tests for math? Do they know what that means? Can they know what that means? If they can't, then that's something that maybe the team does and tries to incorporate somehow in how the documentation is collected. The student may be able to plot the scores on a graph or a chart. To have ownership over that. That's one of the neatest things that I've seen with my kids, is having them, be in charge of not only helping to make their goals, but to plot the data and the progress towards those goals, so that when we celebrate the achievement, they value their own work through that process. Probable outcomes, again, documentation, that living, learning, and working thing that we use that I can share with, that you can get from the Iowa Transition Matrix, which I will share with you in a link later. The goals. Again, students aren't going to be motivated to meet goals if they don't even know what the goals are or what the goals are trying to lead up towards. This is a big oversight that I honestly didn't think about until after the first couple of years of my teaching. I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but I mean, I did, but I didn't really take it to that basic level. Pretty important concept. Services needed. Students advocating for accommodations. In other words, once a student starts to get motivated by the goals and outcomes, and they say, this is who I want to become, this is what I need to do to get there, then what help do I need? Well, then a student might get a little bit more excited about doing the whole test instead of a modified test, for example. Least restrictive, and that happens, and that's not something that I necessarily believed myself in my own teaching until I actually saw it happen, and I started seeing kids say, no, I need to know this stuff. I don't want to have I might need an accommodation, but I don't need a modification. Why? Well, because if I'm going to go to college, they're not going to modify anything for me. I just need to know the difference between accommodations and modifications. So those are accommodations is a question on my tests. It's a vocabulary word that we use. Least restrictive environment. Wow, that's a big one. Does the student know why they're in special education? Do they even know what special education is? Moving up to the high school, it's a hard time anyway. We need to have those conversations with students so that they know that they're not in those classrooms because they're broken. They're not in those classes because there's something wrong with them. That if we find good matches and we do what we can to become the best that we can be, we're not going to be special education people. We're going to be adults that are well-adjusted and found jobs that match us and match our strengths, our interests, our preferences, and our rocks in the road, as we call them. We're all moving down the road together. We just need to learn how to drive around the rocks. Sometimes we do that by ourselves, and we try to problem solve that when we can, and sometimes we do that with the help of others that are close to us on our locus and who are on our team purposefully. Maybe the student invites the team next year. He actually says, hey, I'm having an IEP meeting. Will you come to this? How motivational is that? So there are a living, learning, and working component in the IEP. Skills checklists help parents set obtainable goals for building living independence. If you're like me, I want to have checklists. I want to know the skills that I need to help my kids understand. That makes my job a lot easier. It brings my stress level down. It gives kids, it gives families, it gives everybody just a plan. Uh, my wife is an early childhood special education consultant from Des Moines, and she was talking about the other night when she said students get dignity through structured choice-making opportunities, and they see the value in positive behavior. And I just thought, wow, there it is, preschoolers. But how do we how do we translate that into homes? That I hear a lot of teachers, and I've said this myself. Oh, that's not my job. The living component. Well, if you can't, if you don't have your living situation together, or you can't meet your basic needs at home, then that's going to affect how you learn. That's going to affect how you work. So having the conversation of having a conversation with families that living, learning, and working are all a part of who this person is, and it's a part of who this person is becoming, is very, very important. Parents love these conversations, and although I have to admit I'm not always super popular in IEP meetings with everybody, especially people that want to get done really quickly. But I have wonderful relationships with my parents, and I feel with most of my families that's what we become, is more like family. And the stress goes away, the mistrust goes away, the anger goes away. People start to move through the grieving process, and I am moved beyond what I can even tell you to be able to be a part of these people's lives in a real way. They want to be a part of it. Give them the opportunity. You can share the data that you collect from the living, learning, and working inventories that we'll go through in a bit. Same with learning, but we want to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of our learning? Is it to learn skills? Is it to build independence? Is it to meet objectives? Is it to learn the Common Core? Is it to find constructive ways to put values into practice? These might be questions that you could ask students at some point. You might have to simplify them depending on the cognitive level of the students that you're teaching. I teach level 3 kids, and we are talking about these things. I also teach level 1 kids and level 2 kids and you know, all in between, but I used to be strictly a level 3 teacher, and these are questions that you can have conversations with if you're patient enough to understand what the input language is. But these are also questions that you can ask the IEP team. You know, what is the purpose of my son's learning? Is it to learn skills, or is it to build independence? Is it to meet objectives? Is it to learn the Common Core? Is it to find constructive ways to put values into practice? I think you probably know which order I would put them in. So here essentially is my way of thinking about building the building blocks. Students have to build value. Then they have to understand their abilities and disabilities and be aware of how they are doing. What are they going to do when they fail? They have to be in a safe place to fail, but they have to do something when they fail, and they have to do something when they succeed. Understanding their academic awareness is important as well, because that is a strong indicator of post-secondary outcomes as far as college goes, training schools, working with case managers, that kind of thing. Then exploration. Kids have to be able to get appropriate access to the community to try on different skills. I tell my kids it's kind of like buying a new pair of shoes. You wouldn't try to get a job without trying that job on, so we go and explore. And then when we find a match, then we prepare for it. And that might be college, it might be trade school, it might be working with a job coach from one of the many wonderful job exploration companies here in town. So working. When I introduced myself, I said to you the first thing, I'm Heath Patchell. I'm the work experience coordinator at Johnston High School. But like I said, that's not who I am. I'm a lot more than that. That would probably just tell you a few things. Or if let's say if I just said, hi, I'm Heath and I'm an educator in Johnston, Iowa, if I met you at a cocktail party or an event, that would probably tell you a few things about my values without me having to spell it out so dramatically. For instance, you would probably infer that I value education, I value children, that I hold learning in a higher esteem than finance. I live in Iowa. You might think that you might think that I value living in a frozen tundra and that I'm crazy. And you might be right about all of those things. But more importantly than what you think is what I know about myself. I value my family. I value strong friendships. I value hard work. I value volunteerism. I value purpose. I value music. I value the fact that I know what these things mean to me and was part of getting to decide which of these values would come to define my life, which led me to being able to do what I want to do, which is ultimately to produce work that reflects my personal values. So that no matter what I do, it comes down to this. I will not do my best unless I have faith in my ability to become what I wish to become. And I wish I wouldn't have started that with a negative, but next time. I'll read that again. I won't do my best unless I have faith in my ability to become what I wish to become. To me, that is my ultimate goal as a teacher, is to give that to kids and then stand out of the way and let them problem solve. Be there when they ask for questions when they can't problem solve. This is the good work that will lead to successful outcomes. So when I was a kid, and I'm going to check the time real quick here. Yep, I have a little more time. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a spaceman. I didn't even know what that meant. I just heard Harry Nilsson's Spaceman, and I heard Elton John's Rocket Man, and that feeling of floating out in space for some reason. I wanted to be a spaceman. Then I realized that when it came to math, I had static in the attic, and that was not going to happen for me. So there is a natural process. Usually, like me, I dreamt to be a spaceman. Then I explored, and I became frustrated, essentially, because I realized that that was not going to work for me. I problem solved, and I became self-realized. And then I redirected myself, and I prepared myself to acquire a teaching job that didn't require me to be a math whiz. And I experienced personal growth, and I achieved what I wanted to achieve. This is what I want for my students as well. So what do businesses need? They need problem solvers, team players, and 21st century skills. Sometimes we have to pick and choose between some of those, but more importantly, students should be able to make connections to what is most important to them based on their dreams and their abilities to meet them. I'm going to just let these roll by, and these are just ideas that kind of sum up what I've been talking about. This is the website to the Iowa Transition Matrix. There are dozens of fantastic living, learning, and working assessments that are easy, that are straightforward, that you can gain data in and put directly into the IEP in a multiple of different ways that can help the team say, here is the discrepancy. so we know exactly what to work on. And students should be a part of that as well. transitionassessment.northcentralrrc.org. And this is the Iowa Department of Education's transition matrix. So if you're using these, you know that you're going to be able to stay off the watch list, for example, or you're going to be able to be in best practice. You're going to be able to keep up with current trends to where the IEPs of tomorrow are going to be heading. Your AEA consultants should know about all of this stuff. Ask Resource does. Case managers do. For the most part, school transition staff can help you. Casey's life skills assessments are really good. You can just look that up. It's really cool. And IHaveAPlanIowa.org. I just want to kind of talk about this is a mandate by the state that all kids do this stuff. And with my kids, some of my kids that have pretty severe mental disabilities, it's not very motivating to go through this whole process and then all of a sudden it says you have 0 career matches. That's not cool. So you can go here and you can get materials here to supplement for what they are requiring here. And the Department of Education is okay with that. So you can do your own. This is I Have a Plan Iowa is essentially a transition portfolio. You can create your own transition portfolio with these materials. It's a lot easier and you don't have to log in 500 times and blah, blah, blah. Although I should say that for some kids, this is a wonderful tool. For my son at home, Dylan, I am so thankful to have this. But for some kids, it just doesn't work. Another reason the kid needs to be at his own IEP meeting is because when he turns 18, it's not a parent-led discussion anymore. Parents are often shocked that they take their daughter to the emergency room and the doctor doesn't ask them any questions. They ask their daughter questions. We need to get her as ready for that as we possibly can. So we're going to open it up at this point to some discussion or some questions. I thank you for your attention. I hope it was valuable.
Thank you, Heath, and thank you, everybody. If you want to go ahead, you can either raise your hand, or and I can unmute you, or feel free to type your questions in the question box, and I'll give you a few moments to do that. Okay, I'm not seeing anything pop up, so I'm assuming that everybody feels pretty good about things. I do want to thank you all for attending the webinar. If you do have questions that pop up here quick, I will attend to those, but I just want to remind you as we conclude, I'd like you to complete the survey that should pop up when we end. And then when you complete that, I will get a notice and I can send you a certificate of attendance for the webinar. I'm going to go ahead and check one last time here. All right. And Heath, thank you very much for your time, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you.